Thank you for joining us. Today, I'm Lieutenant Brian Crum with the Violent Crime Division at CMPD. Today, we have a unique project that we'd like to highlight that's providing closure to families all over the country and here in North Carolina. It's called the North Carolina Unidentified Project, and they've been using forensic genetic genealogy to assist law enforcement with identifying our victims and getting them home to their families. Recently, the CMPD worked with this nonprofit in order to return one of our victims home to their family. We'll provide you with a little bit more detail on that in a few minutes, but first I'd like to explain how this partnership works. By collaborating, while we're collaborating in this project, we were contacted by Dr. Ann Ross, a North Carolina board-certified forensic anthropologist with the Department of Human Identification at North Carolina State University, and Ms. Leslie Kaufman, a forensic genealogist and the owner of First Genes, LLC. Leslie has joined us here today and will be available to speak with you all afterwards if you're interested. As part of the North Carolina Unidentified Project, they received a grant to assist the identification of North Carolina's 130 unidentified persons. These are persons who have been found by law enforcement, but we don't know who they are. The first phase of this project paid for the extraction and DNA analysis and research from 13 unidentified persons. When they extract DNA from the remains of these individuals, they are loaded into ancestry and genealogy databases such as GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. Dr. Ross also provides us with an extensive analysis from the anthropological side to help develop a biological profile that we can utilize to help narrow down the pool of potential victims. A tremendous amount of hours go into tracking down records. These are genealogy and family history records that can be used to help identify potential matches with this missing person. As part of their project, these 13 cases they looked at, 6 of the samples were too degraded for them to be able to do work with, but they were able to get profiles from 7 individuals. Dr. Ross and Ms. Kaufman were able to identify all 7 of these individuals, including a gentleman whose remains were found just outside of Uptown Charlotte in 2010. For more on that case, I'd like to introduce you to Detective Matt Hefner, who's going to share some specifics of that case with you.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Good morning. In May of last year, I was contacted by Leslie Kaufman with the North Carolina Unidentified Project. Leslie and her crew had already started working this Charlotte case. They told me that this particular case was a unidentified male off of Wadsworth Place, found in 2010. She told me that they had already done some anthropology work on it. They had loaded the DNA into GEDmatch, which is a database that law enforcement can use. Leslie explained to me that they were out of money and they needed some money to load this into Family Tree DNA, which is another database. I presented that to our chain of command. The CMPD approved that, paid for it. The DNA profile was loaded into Family Tree DNA, and Leslie received the matches. Leslie Kaufman continued to work this case for us. It was at our cost of only $650. She continued to work this case and build a family tree around the matches that she received. Through that, she continued to build out the family tree, and eventually she learned about a man named Napoleon McNeil. She learned that Napoleon McNeil was last seen in 2009, and so she and I, Leslie Kaufman and I, reached out to the brother of Napoleon McNeil, and we asked him if he'd be willing to give a DNA sample. He agreed. We got that sample, we loaded it into Family Tree DNA, and the match came back a positive, meaning that the brother we talked to was a brother in kinship to our unidentified male. Therefore, we're able to positively identify this as Napoleon McNeil, born in 1965. What we learned is Napoleon McNeil was from the Raleigh area. He had no known ties to the Charlotte area. Had it not been for this genealogy work and Leslie Kaufman, we never would have determined this person's identity. I'd also like to point out that we would never have been able to do this without her. When Leslie Kaufman reached out to me, they were already out of money, so she agreed to do this case essentially for free for the CMPD. She worked long hours and many days, and we can't thank her enough. For more on that, I'll let Lieutenant Crum talk about our partnership going forward with her. Thank you.
So I think it's pretty impressive that with their help, we've been able to solve a decades-old mystery or a decade-old mystery. It's really important to highlight what Detective Hefner said about us, having a victim that has no ties to Charlotte. There's no reason that we would have gone looking for him or expected that he was one of our victims. Identifying missing persons takes a tremendous amount of work, and as we go through some of these cases, we have to go with the things that we have. And prior to forensic genetic genealogy, we had to rely on reports to make educated guesses to go out and find family members to potentially link our victims to. And this tool has really just opened that up and allowed us to proactively go out and try to find out who these people are. So currently the CMPD, and that's Mecklenburg County as a whole, has about 11 sets of human remains that are still unidentified. These cases reach back to 1975, so there's quite a bit of time on some of these cases. And obviously DNA technology didn't exist then, which makes that all the more challenging. It's not like we routinely would collect samples from folks at that time. So we're going to work with the North Carolina Unidentified Project going forward to hopefully get some more closure for some of our families. Getting our victims home is a solemn responsibility for our detectives. There are over 40,000 unidentified folks in the United States at any time, so I mean this is just a small piece, our 13 of that 40,000 individuals that need to get home. And again, hopefully forensic genealogy has kind of opened up the door for possibilities for us to get them home. When Leslie is able to identify a lost loved one, families are just so incredibly grateful to find closure. Just like Mr. McNeil, his family never knew what happened to him, and at least they had some idea of where he went. They say he just one day never came back home, and they always wondered what happened. And at least we're able to provide them with some closure and get our victims home. As Leslie can attest, as a result of some of her work, she's formed lifelong friendships in connecting with some of these victims' families and being able to help them out. Forensic genetic genealogy is a tremendous tool for us going forward in the violent crimes investigations as well, so not just with unidentified human remains. That's kind of the beginning of where this goes, but we're also leveraging this technology elsewhere within the department is in researching sexual assaults and potentially open murders. So this is a really awesome tool for us. I'll take any questions that you guys might have right now.
What were the kind of circumstances around Mr. McNeil's, I guess, death or disappearance?
I'll let him, he's the expert, so I'll step aside and let him do that.
Sure. So doing the research on Mr. McNeil's history, he was living on the streets in the Raleigh area. He'd never been to Charlotte that anyone knew of, so the family's understanding was he was essentially living as a homeless male in the Raleigh area. At some point, he moved to the Charlotte area before this happened. I know we have a last contact November of 2009 in Raleigh. And this case was October of 2010.
Was this considered a homicide, a death investigation, or?
It's listed as undetermined. There's no indication on the body of any trauma or any other homicide, so it's just listed as undetermined at this point.
What was it like when were you able to make contact with his family and give them this news?
I was. So Leslie called me one evening, 8:30 at night, outside of business hours, and said, "We got a match. It's him." And so I was able to call the brother and tell the brother that night. Napoleon's parents are older, but they're still alive, and it was good to be able to tell them as well. The brother told them that what happened. It's sad to know that he's passed away, but also good to know what happened to him.
Is most of Napoleon's family still in Raleigh? Or?
Yeah, Garner specifically, the Garner area.
You talked a little bit, Lieutenant Crum, about how you could use this not just with unidentified missing people, that sort of thing, but also with murders and sexual assaults. Can you elaborate a little bit more?
So we always try to stay on the cutting edge of technology, and this is definitely on the forefront of what we're able to do with technology. So we haven't had the opportunity to use this with regard to murder investigations, but it's something we're looking at, so it's a new tool that's available. It has been tremendous. We actually have a SACI grant, so a Sexual Assault Kit Initiative grant through the Bureau of Justice Assistance, currently focusing on forensic genetic genealogy with regard to open, cold sexual assault cases. And we're having some really good progress with that, and so we can probably share some of that with you guys at a later date.
You said, I think originally that there were 13 people within CMPD that were unidentified, and now there's only 11 So is there enough?
Sorry, so the initial case, the 13 that they looked at, that was through the North Carolina Unidentified Project. So they selected 13 individuals from that, I can't remember the original number within the state, the 130. So they had the funding for the 13. Charlotte has approximately 11 that are eligible to work with this. And I say Charlotte, it's the Mecklenburg County area, so that's our entire jurisdiction.
So are you now moving forward, working on those cases and providing funding for that?
That is the plan. So, there is some cost associated with that, so we're looking at sources of funding both internally and wherever we might be able to find it to go forward with that. Also, there's a certain degree of, kind of sorting through the cases. We have to see which cases would be ideal for doing this. We want to start there and kind of progress through them. I think I kind of mentioned sometimes the DNA can be degraded based on a multitude of factors, so we need to find the best cases to start with.
And how do you go back, you said some cases date back to 1975, so how do you go about extracting DNA from some of those cases that you may not have originally gotten DNA from?
So the remains, we send those off to outside laboratories that are experts in extracting that. So they find, typically it's bone tissue, they'll actually take extracts from the bone and try to develop that. And there's probably a little bit of art to that, and I don't totally understand the science, but I know they know exactly where to go and to find the best chance of extracting good DNA from those remains.
And in most of these cases that you are dealing with, are they death investigations or homicides or kind of a mix of things?
So there's a mixture. We have a few that we know are homicides, and we can tell that based upon, obviously evidence at, the site we recover them from or damage to the remains. Some of these are undetermined because of the state of the remains at the time we found them. We can't necessarily say definitively, but certainly identifying that individual would help us to kind of make a determination. In Mr. McNeil's case, we don't have anything to indicate homicide, but there are other cases that once we figure out who they are, that could change one way or the other. So a couple of definite homicides, and then the others we just have to kind of take as we figure out who they are.
So people are kind of familiar with like Ancestry.com and those sort of things. Is it similar? I mean, kind of in layman's terms.
General idea, yes. So, and it gets into the really heavy science stuff when they explain it to me, and but it's really fascinating to see how people like Leslie work, because they start talking about triangulating relatives, and these aren't like necessarily close connections. Like when you and I would do Ancestry, we might be thinking about a cousin or a relative that you might actually have a term for. They start talking into like 12th cousins and going back 100 years or 150 years to people that you would never have any idea you're related to, in order to figure out who our missing folks are. So it's it's Ancestry, but just to a level I just would never foresee. It's pretty cool.
We can take one or two more, and then we also have Leslie here if you guys want to speak with her afterwards.
If somebody has a loved one that they believe is missing and may be dead, can they reach out and say, I want to give my like DNA sample just in case, that sort of thing? Do they need to wait for you to go to them? How's that work?
No, absolutely. So our missing person unit typically tries to collect DNA from any of our close relatives of missing folks. I really encourage them to call our missing persons unit, which is another one of our units in the Violent Crime Division. We collect those routinely and place those into a system called NamUs, which is actually a national database for missing persons. But we also, absolutely, if somebody has a belief that one of their relatives is missing and maybe one of ours, we would love all the information and potentially DNA that we could get from them.
Did Napoleon's family put out a missing persons report by chance?
They did not. They did not report him missing. They, at that point, still didn't realize he was deceased. He had been separated from the family for some time, so they, for lack of a better word, gave up hope, and this gave them that hope back.
All right, I think that about wraps it up.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I do have a question about an unrelated.
Sure, we can.
Sure.